Right, from the Fairfax City, we are very grateful that Alex Heffes accepted the invitation to our show. Alex, welcome to my humble podcast.
It's good to be here.
No problem. Alex, let's go back to the beginning of your life. Were you born like in a sort of musical family? How old were you when perhaps your parents were pushing you, hey, you should start taking piano lessons, guitar lessons, so don't watch that much TV and read a lot of books, that sort of thing.
Well, I started playing the piano because they actually gave my brother piano lessons, and my brother was very musical when he was small, and so he was the one who was starting lessons, and I think I felt left out, so I said I wanted to have lessons. Um, but I was just crazy for films when I was very small. I used to go to the cinema all the time from a young age. It was really cheap, back then to go to the movies, and we had a movie theater at the end of our street.
Yeah.
So in the holidays, my mum would give us a few pounds and say, go, go to the movies, and we'll see you at the end of the afternoon. So just from a really young age, I became very aware about music in movies just because I loved movies so much. And then I would come home and I would try and pick out some of the tunes on the piano. And I discovered at a really early age, it's actually really hard. I went to see Star Wars in 1977. I was really young, and I remember coming home and very excited and sat down at the piano and was trying to pick out the tune. And I just found it very, very hard, but also very intriguing. And so I spent a long time listening on the record and trying to figure out what that harmony is, because John Williams is he's a master at writing great tunes that have really quite hard, difficult harmony behind it, and so it's not something you can easily pick out as a 6-year-old. But it got me very, from a young age. I started listening to the soundtracks for some reason, and that's what got me hooked.
And then we're at home where your parents had vinyl
Yeah,
CDs starting soon after or some kind of
yeah, it
stuff.
was vinyl. So I was growing up then. That was the 70s, so it was all vinyl. And like we were just joking before, I sort of didn't want to listen to my parents' record collection. So I remember we had their records. We had like, Help and, all the Beatles records. But as far as was concerned, that was sort of old music. Even then, it probably was less than 10 years old at the time, which is crazy to think about it. So I've discovered that music again for myself later in life. But yeah, I started collecting vinyls probably in the 80s. Um,
Gotcha.
and I've still got a lot of them, although I don't have a record player anymore at the moment, so I need to buy I need to
Well,
buy
you
one.
need to get one, man.
I need to get one, but the funny thing is that now when we do soundtrack releases, sometimes we do them on vinyl, and it's sort of gone full circle. And I did one on vinyl a few years ago, and we had it mastered for vinyl, and they sent me a test pressing. And I've got a friend who has a really nice turntable, so we went to listen to it at his place, and I was so shocked with how good the vinyl sounded. It sounded so familiar because that's what I grew and what you grew up with, and but I hadn't listened to vinyl for so long. I was half expecting it to sound a little lo-fi or something, and it just sounded so good. I was
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
shocked. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. When people say, well, vinyl, I mean, CDs sound better than vinyl. Well, if you have an expensive stereo and equipment and you have quality for the
Yeah.
cable,
Every
the
step.
preamp, it, it's unbelievable. It sounds very, very good. So
It does. And in fact, I remember when CDs first came in, I was still really young, and we were told this was much better than vinyl. It was going to be amazing. And I remember we bought we had a CD player really early on, and we bought a couple of CDs, and I listened to them, and I
yeah,
was very disappointed. And back then I thought, well, maybe I just wasn't judging it. But actually, the early CD technology was quite poor. It
yeah.
was a very young technology, and it really wasn't very good. And it's still, we have stuff mastered now for streaming, obviously, is a big thing. And so, but
Yeah.
I've had work of mine mastered, specifically for streaming and for CD and for vinyl. And I can certainly say that the CD versions are the least good, sonically from my ear. You can sort of hear that the 16-bit, if we're getting like sort of techie, you can sort of hear that the bit crushing a little bit. It's not great. So I've never been
Yeah,
a fan of CD as a
I
format.
got you. I got you. Were you in any bands at all in high school before you went to sort of college?
So even though I was the one that I wasn't going to do music, it was going to be my brother. After I started learning for a little bit, my parents put me in a specialist music school in London called the Purcell School, so it was a school. We did regular schoolwork, but every kid played an instrument, and we all did a fair amount of musical stuff in school every day. But it wasn't because I was a prodigy. I was never expecting to be like an amazing concert pianist. I liked music, and the school was very interesting. It was full of interesting kids that didn't quite fit into other schools. A lot of them were good with music, but a lot of them were just funny kids that hadn't fitted in somewhere else. And the head teacher had this great ethos of spotting kids that he thought he could help. And so when I look back on it now, it was quite an unusual education. It was a small school. There were about 100 kids, and we were in a big house on the top of a hill, and some of us practiced in the bathrooms. So, it was sort of chaotic. We had a big garden, and sometimes the teacher would take us out in the garden and just teach us about the plants and the flowers in the garden. So it was a sort of an unusual scenario. And so I was playing, singing in choir and playing and mostly classical, all classical. But at that young age, even I wanted to be a composer. But in those days, being a composer was not a career path.
Right.
It just wasn't. There were no courses. You couldn't learn to be a film composer. It was like this far off magical thing that nowadays, if you want to be a composer, you can go to college and you can learn to be a film composer. But it wasn't a thing. So I was doing a lot of classical music, but in my own time, I was listening to Pink Floyd, as we were talking about. I was like, I cannot believe it's 50 years this year that "Wish You Were Here" has been
Right.
recorded. It's just that's wild. But I was listening to everything from Mahler symphonies to Pink Floyd to used to listen to Jacques Lussier doing his Bach, and sort of swingle singers things on records that I found at home, and I would just listen to pretty much anything. I've never really been one to compartmentalize music. I like good music stuff, something that excites me. So, and I think funny enough, that's gone on to form a part of my career because I've had a career that has been involved in lots of different types of music from all around the world, but I never went looking for that. I think it's just naturally how I was as a child growing up. I was just interested in different stuff. So, yeah, after I went to college and I did a very classical education, I started playing jazz and I had a band. Jazz sort of blew my mind at that point because it's such an incredibly it's a very freeing form, but the funny thing about jazz is that everyone thinks that it's all just free form and people come up with this amazing stuff. But jazz players practice just as much as classical players. You need a technical mastery over your instruments so that you can play and your brain and your hands are able to like think almost independently. So I spent a lot of time playing jazz piano. Um, and then I got involved in working with bands, doing arrangements. I started working for doing commercials for adverts. And because I had learned how to, well, I thought I knew how to orchestrate and, work with an orchestra, but until you've really done it, it's sort of academic. So I'd done all the academic side, but I was very, very young. I was in my early 20s and I was working with people who were in bands who I was working with one guy who was very successful doing TV adverts, and I got to meet him by accident. And he couldn't read or write music, but he was doing really good. He was writing good, really good music, and he needed someone to do his orchestra arrangements. So at an early age, I was pushed out in front of orchestras in London, where I was living, in all the great studios, and learned the really hard way because there's theory and there's practice. And what I found was that great arrangements in the studio are usually a lot more simple than you think. So I'd learned all of these fancy things, and I'd studied Debussy and Ravel and all this stuff, but actually stripping it all back and learning how to just make something very simple work was a huge education. And later on, when I was working in film, we worked with bands. We did a film with Elton John. We did a couple of projects with Blur, the English band, and working with all those people who came from such a different background musically to me, I just loved. I wanted to shed all of the stuff that I'd learned, all the classical stuff. I wanted to like put that to one side, and I wanted to know why all these other guys were writing really great music, but they didn't know necessarily what the rules should be or how you wrote out an orchestral score. I just got a real taste for working with people from different musical worlds. So that's how I started working in studios, is arranging for commercials and then bands and then assisting a composer, which turned out to be, incredibly lucky and the greatest way to learn, because you sit next to a composer every day for a number of years. I helped him write music. I helped him, make cups of tea and all that stuff. But because this was a fairly long time ago, the technology was a lot more simple, and so I got involved in music stuff rather than having to manage computer rigs and networks and sample libraries. We had a very basic setup. We used to write the music very simply, and then we would go and record it with an orchestra. So I was lucky to be writing, excuse me, writing and arranging and conducting a lot of um, real orchestras and real musicians from a young age. And so that's a really lucky thing to do. And that's one thing with kids nowadays who have a lot of them have fantastic technical musical ability, probably far higher than a lot of us did at that age. But what I did have was the ability to stand it out in front of orchestras and learn what works and what doesn't. And a lot of the kids now, they're really good at samples, but they're not having the opportunity to go and work with real orchestras. I mean, some of them are, but not in the same way. They're having to learn from using samples rather than having to use real orchestras. So that's one big difference I see between my upbringing and a lot of the kids that I work with and I mentor now. But I'm very impressed with how musically sort of deft and skillful they are. But I feel for them that they're not able to have that same experience. That's for sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, difficult to get a studio time or somebody show you the ropes and show you at the beginning, right? Most of
Yeah,
them write music with a computer. I don't know,
well,
with a,
that's
right?
right. But in those days, as I said, there were no courses, and it was a sort of like a bit of a being a film composer was something that people just didn't really want to do, except I did.
Yeah.
And so there were fewer people, and I was lucky to be mentored by some great people. And I spent a lot of time at Air Studios just shortly after Lyndhurst was set up. We were recording there a lot, and people were very kind there, and I would hang out after hours at the studio, a lot and make friends. And I'd sit in on sessions or I'd crash sessions. And back in those days, going to Air and Abbey Road and Angel, and we had a lot of other studios which have now closed in London, unfortunately. Smaller studios. There was Olympic, there was Eden. There were all sorts of, there's still Rack, I think, closed, unfortunately. But yeah, it was a unique time where it's still not that many people wanted to do it. I don't know, something changed at some point, and then everyone suddenly got excited about writing film music. But when I was a student, it was sort of like a dirty word. It wasn't something that you confessed you wanted to do because it was a little lowbrow. And
Yeah.
it probably is, but I like it for that.
Good for you, man. At the beginning, you were assistant to composer Simon Boswell, right?
Mhm.
And I think you scored over 20 movies together, if my
Yeah.
understanding is correct. Feel free to elaborate on the experience and how you end up meeting Simon. I have seen and listened to several of his film work, and
Yeah.
80s, 90s. And he's very good actually. So
Yeah, I mean Simon is a great composer, and it was a good match because at the time Simon had come from more of a pop background, although he was good with orchestras, but I had come from more of a classical background, so we were, it worked, it was very complementary. And he was very kind and very generous, and we spent a lot of time together. And that's exactly what I try and do with my assistants now. I remember that experience. And so I always try to speak to, I have a lot of kids contacting me about how they can get on in their career. And I just remember people have been very consistently generous and kind with their time over the years. So I tried to pay it back. But certainly hanging around studios, watching some of the best orchestras in the world and the best engineers and music production people, just sitting next to them and asking them, why are you doing that? I probably drove them nuts with questions, um, but that was an absolute privilege, and I see it now. I sort of knew it then, but I see it more now because those opportunities are fewer and more far between for a lot of the kids. So I look back on it now like a bit of a dream, working with Simon. It's funny because when I went to meet him, first of all, I only went to have a cup of tea and just like get some career advice. And the next day, he hired me, and I worked with him for quite a few years after that.
wow.
Um, and that's just how it goes in the music business. It's not uncommon, to be honest. And through there, I met pretty much everyone that I started working with in the film business, and I met lots of producers and directors, and as I got more involved, I ended up doing my own films when he wasn't available or he didn't want to do something. And then I met Kevin Macdonald, and I did a film called One Day in September, which was Kevin's first feature documentary, and it was his first film, and I scored it, and it won the Oscar that year for best documentary
So
feature. Which so that was amazing. We went on to make a lot of films together, and we made Last King of Scotland, and I went out to Uganda there. Kevin wanted me to go and record some of the bands that were in the film because the music, it's an amazing film with Forrest Whitaker, who plays Idi Amin in the 70s, and a lot of that music is not available to buy or hear anywhere. So we actually found one of the bands that had been around in the 70s, and we recorded some of their hits from the 70s. And I just took a laptop, and we found some people there to help us, and it was a big adventure. But when you're young like that, you don't really know that there are any rules. You just go and you try something, and that then after that, people thought that I was a world music expert because I'd come back from Africa with a bunch of stuff in the film. Forrest got an Oscar, and the film got nominated for this, and the soundtrack got lots of attention. And so people started asking me to do music set around the world, and I ended up doing Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, the Idris Elba film, where I went back to Africa, to South Africa, and recorded lots of stuff for the film there. And subsequent to that, I worked not so long ago with Anushka Shankar. We did Mira Nair's series, A Suitable Boy. Anushka playing sitar, and we were like writing together. And it's funny, but I'm not a world music expert in any sense, but I think I just really like collaborating with different people, and I guess the universe pays back what what you enjoy doing. It's sort of like you find yourself doing those things. So I've always been very open to collaborating with people and very interested in it, and it's led me to a lot of these different areas musically that I was never seeking to be involved in, but obviously was interested in.
I got you. Yeah, we will unpack a lot of things that you mentioned there because it's
Yeah, I
very
know.
good stuff.
A lot going on.
Do you with you? You mentioned that you work with Kevin in a lot of movies. Is it important for you? Is it necessary for you? Is it comfort zone uh, to stay with the same director, or it is so happen that he like you like it, you guys get along, you know exactly when you see a particular scene that what he's looking for, and he from his point of view he can rely on you, you meet the deadlines or whatever. It's good and bad, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know,
one area, right?
I think every composer is looking to find their director that they can find that unique bond with.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sure it's a bit like a marriage in a way, you
Yeah.
get to know someone very well, and the more you get to know someone, it gets easier and it gets harder, and because you're less polite to each other. But it's a wonderful thing because you can like cut through to someone's shorthand, which is great. And I did a lot of films with Kevin, and I think that there does come a point where you really get to know someone in a way. But you also want to stay fresh, and I think directors want to keep on making fresh films, and you want to keep on making fresh music. So it's important if you're working with someone a lot that you also don't just do the same thing over and over again, because that would, it would go stale for sure. I did many years ago. I worked on the movie of Sweeney Todd with Tim Burton, and that's a sort of a case in point because obviously Tim has worked with Danny Elfman through his career, and they're sort of synonymous. But that was one film because it was an adaptation of the musical. Danny was not on the film, and I ended up coming in to do some of the arrangements and adapt the score and write some score for it. But it was very interesting because Tim had just worked so much with Danny that I didn't know his shorthand at all. And that's a case in point of you need to build up like a rapport. And I loved working with him. He was amazing, but he would say things to me that he obviously explained to Danny in ways that I didn't understand, where he would just wave his hand and say, just make it a bit more like that, and he'd just wave his hand, then he'd go off, and I wouldn't speak to him for a week, and I wouldn't quite know what that meant. So yeah, when you've worked with a director a lot, sometimes you work out these shorthands where they say something that you understand that no one else would, and that's a lot of the business of being a composer, is getting under the skin of your director and understanding what they're asking, what their hopes and their fears are, and to give them what they are asking for. But also, I believe that many great directors are also asking you to give them something more that they know they want. Everyone wants to be given what they're asking for, but they want to also be delighted and surprised and something else. And that's the mark of a really great composer, and a really great composer-director relationship, I think, is where the composer is able to give the director what they want with something extra that no one had foreseen.
Got you. How many times do you need to see a movie, or at least the first 50 minutes or draft, before you began formulate an idea about, I think the music should be like this or like that?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question. I think I've definitely done some movies where I've seen the movie once and I know exactly. I just have like a bird's eye picture of what the music needs to be in that film. And there are other times when it's just like an uphill battle, and you're just like every every note is like a struggle to figure out what the music is in the film. It's less common, but you definitely, it can be both. It can be both ways, and it's partly to do with the film itself and the filmmaker and how clear the filmmaker might be. But watch if you've probably never had the dull experience of watching a film without any music on it, but most films without music on it, they're very hard to watch. But what you discover is that films that are functioning really well without music tend to be really good films because they're already functioning well within themselves, and that gives you the opportunity to write music to elevate it and really bring it to life. Sometimes what happens is that the film is not functioning perfectly, and so they're filling the film up with temporary music, which is totally fine because it's a way, it's a guide, it's like a roadmap of what could work. But what happens is that sometimes the filmmaking is being shored up by the temp music. The filmmaking, there's something about the way it's cut or the performances or the script that's not quite right. And so it's really leaning heavily on music to make it work. And that can be really tough because you're always compensating for something that is not firing on all cylinders all the time. So it's a great question, and there's no rhyme or reason to it, but there was one film, the first film I did with Justin Chadwick before we did Mandela was a film, a really lovely small film called The First Grader, which was set in East Africa, actually. It's a true story about a guy who went back to school at the age of 70 to have his primary schooling that he never got as a child. It's such a beautiful film, and I saw it once, and I immediately sat down and wrote half the score just in a few days. And Justin came to watch it, and he said, "Have you written anything?" I said, "I've written like half the movie," and he was really concerned. He was like, "Oh my God, that was very quick." But when we sat down and watched it, he just loved it, and everything just worked because somehow something in the film spoke to me, and I had this like overall vision of what it was. But not that's sort of unusual, not every film goes like that. Sometimes you need to live with it for a while. Sometimes you need to find what the sound of that film is. Some films are just very orchestral, and so you're really looking for something thematic. But sometimes there's a film that needs some other element to it, like a synth element or something else. And so you can go looking for what the special sauce is that needs to find that language for that film. So they're all very different.
I got it. I got it. If I were to hire you, Alex, and I give you a script, I will start shooting next week, and I have the producer, we'll put the money, and we're looking for people. Can you formulate an idea just by reading the script, or is
Yeah.
even harder? Or you
Well,
have done?
that's a really good question again, because that happens surprisingly quite a bit, especially if you've worked with directors and so they want to carry on working with you on your next project, so they will send you a script in advance. So even before they've shot it, they'll want you to read the script just to get an idea. And sometimes a director will want me to write music to the script so that occasionally they've wanted it for the actors to hear the music on set whilst they're shooting it, which is sort of terrifying because you don't even know what the film is yet. It's quite
That's right.
you know but it's a hard thing to do, but actually it can be very liberating because you're not yet tied down by what the film is. You're tied down by what it could be, which can be it can be very liberating musically. And what tends to happen is that you write quite a lot of music, and a lot of it maybe doesn't end up in the film, but some of it, like the core of an idea or something, will, and it'll spark a conversation. I've done that quite a lot. There's a film I did called Hope Gap with Annette Bening, which I did 5 or 6 years ago, which is a piano and string score, which um, was very much written like that. It was written, I went down to watch them film. I read the script and then went down to the south coast in England to watch Annette shooting a scene on the White Cliffs. And it was just a glorious day for the UK. It was unusual. The sun was out, the sky was blue, the cliffs were white. It was just like, it looked like a movie, but it actually was, they were shooting a movie that day. And it was so inspiring. I spent the day there watching that. I came home and I wrote some music, and that pretty much is the front title of the film, which goes all the way through the film.
Yep.
Um, and it's unusual for it to work out quite so much like that, but it's something that people do ask me to do, and I've learned to embrace it because it's great thinking time. It's an opportunity for you to really work out musical ideas before you're tied down to something.
I got it. In general, let's say for a particular movie, you write, I don't know, 10 tracks, 10 pieces, whatever you want to call it, and they end up using seven or so. The other three belongs to you, belongs to a studio. Can you keep it and recycle a little bit down the road with another movie, with another idea and another?
Right. I think, Ennio Morricone, I think, was the master of that, apparently. He
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
I think apparently I was told he had a stack of music on his piano this high that was all stuff that he'd either written for something else or just written. And
yeah.
I had a producer friend who worked with him, and he said he went to Ennio's apartment and he would take one off the top and say, well, how about this one? Or take another one. How about this one? But for me, I've never found that it works quite like that because, well, first of all, the film company, generally, the studio tends to own a lot of, mostly they tend to own the music. So even if you've written it but it's not being used in the film, they do tend to still own the copyright to it. But if there is music left over, I don't tend to find that it works out to be that useful because it's in my mind it's so attached to something else that I find it very hard to take that same music and put it in a different
Mm.
film. So psychologically, it's sort of bonded with something else. So I don't find that that's something that works out all that often. Although there are things that you might have tried to do in a film that hadn't worked out, that you could take that approach and try it, somewhere else. But I find it's a little bit like doing a magic trick twice. You never want to do the same trick twice because if it works once, it's just like that's good. Leave it at that.
So, thank you, Rich. How difficult is to work with kind of, I don't know if the role will be a music supervisor where they you have written your music and Johnny take 10 seconds out to fit a particular scene and you may not like it or you may not agree. And the same question working with a director and a producer where they don't get along and you are in front of the piano and two people are screaming at you, the producer say, hey, don't listen to the director, and the director say, don't listen to the producer, there's Spike Movie, yeah, he's putting the money. Have you been in a situation like that, and
Yeah,
what do you do, how you manage?
almost almost every day. It's not uncommon, but it's just because when you're doing a film is highly collaborative, there's so many people
Yeah.
involved. And it's just part of the everyday, just rough and tumble of trying to create something together that people bump up against each other. And it's usually, even when they end up yelling at each other, it's not as bad as it sounds. But I have had a scenario. I had one scenario where the director and the producer were yelling at each other so much. I ended up having to, yeah, the director had to go and have her heart checked out at the hospital because she was having palpitations. That was not a good one. But I guess the thing about music is that it cuts very deeply to our own sense of taste. Everyone's sense of musical taste is we feel it's very, very personal to us. And so if someone doesn't agree with something, a piece of music, if another person's saying, I don't think that works at all, what you're really saying is, I don't like your taste. And it can be very people can take that really bad. They can take it really personally. Of course, the composer's the one who, we're caught in the middle of this all the time. And so we've sort of become, I wouldn't say we're immune to it because I think it can be really hard, but we're very much, my job is very much, um, okay, if that doesn't work for you, I'll do it and I'll do it another way because my job is to find, 100 different ways to write something and for me to feel
Mm.
like they're all good. I can't write something that I don't feel is good because I'll never be able to convince someone. But to a certain extent, that's just an occupational hazard. But for other people, for directors and producers and editors, it can be really tough when they're all duking it out with what they think the musical direction should be because everyone secretly feels like they're right. I mean, that's the human condition that we all probably think we see the world in the right the right way. And compromise is important, but sometimes if you've got many voices, you're in the danger zone of compromising and it gets watered down and it's neither this nor that nor the other. So I think it is very important for people to have strong opinions, especially if they're talented people. to have strong opinions. I think the composer needs the strongest opinion, to be honest. And then for me to be able to bring to bear what I'm being asked to do, and if I have multiple people asking me, the first question I have to ask myself is, well, what do I think is right? If I think, if I'm thinking differently to everyone else, then I have to think, well, is there something that they're saying that I'm missing? Have I missed something about the film that I'm not reading correctly? Or sometimes just the way that we talk about music is very tricky because music really doesn't translate into words very easily. And so the way people communicate to composers and to me about what they want in their film can be misunderstood very easily because people can say something like, I want it to be very staccato, or I want it to be very something. I don't want any flutes. But actually, that doesn't necessarily mean exactly what they're saying. You need to go to the root of what they're saying. I don't want any flutes might actually mean I don't want it to sound very classical. I don't want it to sound like a classical orchestra, but that doesn't necessarily mean there won't be moments where you could hear something on a flute and it might very much work, but you need to get to the root of what you're being asked.
Mm.
A lot of the time it's what you're being asked not to do. People find it's not the director's job to be able to tell you what to do, because if they could do that, they would be a composer. So a lot of the time what people are telling you is what they don't want, which can be very useful, but it's always coming from a place of negative negativity. So this is very much a dialectic problem. It's a problem of communication and conversation because music just doesn't work in words. So I find one of the easiest ways is just to write something and play it, and then we can discuss rather than talking in the abstract. That's immediately that cancels out 100 different conversations because it's either this is working or there's some element of this that's working or it doesn't work at all. So that cuts straight to, and most of the time, most of what you do,
It works out. Yeah.
it works. And if it doesn't, it's an opportunity to delve deeper and to find out what their vision for the film is and how you can get to that spot.
Got it. Are you given enough time, to write a score? I mean, what's the minimum you need? Like a couple of weeks, a month? I mean, ideally, right? Sometimes they call you the night before, I suppose, hey, I need something for today, for Friday morning or whatever,
Right.
or it doesn't work, or you're given enough
Well,
time
what
to.
I mean, what's the law? I'm sure there is a law with its name, which is that, you use the amount of time that you're given for anything.
Yeah,
And that could be very short or it could be very long.
yeah,
I would say that sometimes having less time can be beneficial because it concentrates your mind on cutting straight to the cut to the chase. What exactly is needed here? It can be psychologically really quite good to have less time. Of course, more time can give you more time to experiment and try things, and that can be wonderful, but you can get to the point where there's so much time that no one really feels that it's a real deadline, and so no one is concentrating that much on what you're what you're trying to show them until 4 weeks before. So it's not unusual to write a lot of music in a few weeks. Ideally, you'd have 6 weeks or 8 weeks to write a lot of music. We're talking 70 or 80 minutes of orchestral music, and that's a lot of music to get on the page and get in a state where an orchestra could sit down and play it. And obviously film composers rely on having a team of people to help them because there's no physical way you could get all of that on the page without having an orchestration team and a copying team and editors and all these things. So, but what I will say is that what's changed has been the technology now means that films don't really ever what they call locked picture. You know, it used to be in the old days when you were cutting on film, or it was much more difficult to cut on computer, that they would get the film to a point where it was locked, it wouldn't change, and then you would score it, you would do the music, and it would be finished. Now everything is very fluid because everyone can cut the film on their laptop, and you can keep on cutting and keep on trying new things. And so what's happened in post-production is that we almost always end up scoring a version of the film which is going to change after you've recorded the music, which can be very frustrating because it means you write the music, you go and record it with the orchestra, and then all of a sudden the film is different again and the music doesn't fit. So I've learned that a music editor, you know, is very important, someone who you trust with really good musical ears to be able to take the material that you might have recorded that now doesn't fit in the film and to cut it so that it does fit again in the film. It's just a function of how technology has led filmmaking to be, that this comes up a lot, and so I'm very stoic about it. And in fact, it can be really interesting because I've had experiences where the music has got the film has got so changed that the music that I've written for the beginning of the film gets moved to the end, or the end to the middle, or and it can be really interesting because sometimes people take music that you've written and place it in a way that you had never quite anticipated. But my theory is if the music is good enough and there's enough internal um, structure and it's musically strong enough, it can withstand being chopped up and can actually be really interesting being put in different places in the film. And I've had experiences where the editors called me up and said, "Hey, I tried this piece of music on the opening," and at first I'm like, "Really? That was not where it was intended to go." And I watched it, and I would say, wow, I really like that. I almost, I wouldn't have thought of that myself. So that's another way that being collaborative in film is, you need to be open to ideas, and sometimes that can lead to something really interesting.
Gotcha, gotcha. What about when I don't know if at your level you could or you should manage like two movies at the same time. So let's say you work in Johnny's movie Monday and Wednesday, and you work in Peter's movie Tuesday and Thursday. And can you, in your head, can you separate the stuff from Johnny with an action
Right.
movie? So Peter's, I don't know, comedy or whatever.
It's most important that Johnny and Peter are not talking on the
Well,
phone
that's
to one
correct.
another. I mean, the thing is, I really don't like doing that for all the reasons you
Yeah.
say. It messes your head up. But the thing is that with the way that technology has it affected the schedules, things do tend to crash into each other a lot more than they used to.
Yeah.
Just it's a function. I think we're all having to multitask in different ways. We're all doing
Mm.
emails and doing this and that at the same time, and it's sort of the same with films. So I've tried to slice it many different ways. I think it is important for me to try and carve up my schedule so that I genuinely do try and have a window of time to work on this and this so that they're not overlapping. Occasionally, it's just impossible. Sometimes a film will come back when you think it's finished, and then all of a sudden you have to write a new scene because they've gone back and they've reshot something. And yeah, you just have to manage your best. I did ask of a a good friend of mine this, who's a very very well-known composer, and he said the same thing. It made me feel good. He said, look, he's tried doing it where he'll spend a morning on one film and an afternoon on the other, or 2 days of the week on, 2 days on the week like this. And there's no answer to it really. You just have to find your way through it. But it's very, I think personally, it's very important to give people your full and proper attention as much as you can, because um, you're going to be much more productive in getting the thing done if your head isn't too full of too many things at once. But you know, then life intervenes. What can I say?
Gotcha. I got you. Got you. Got you. writing music, composing music, you have it on your head that you're going to be orchestrating that music or the other way around. You can say, no, Alex like to orchestrate all his music and so on and so forth. It's like a mandatory for you to you go for the composite orchestration, or you always when writing music on your head you say, no, I this is for me to orchestrate and so on and so forth, not just composing.
Yeah, well, when I'm writing, I generally I'm writing into full score, so a lot of it will be I'm already orchestrating it as I'm
I got it.
writing
I got
it.
it. Yeah.
Um, but that said, I do rely on really good orchestrators to then take those scores and make to finish them up and voice them out properly and get them to a point where they are fully finished. Most of what I'm doing is 70 or 80% done. Um, but it doesn't really matter. I think the important thing is that the intent of the music is clear in the music. I mean, if you look at some great composers who've got used to do pencil sketches, you can look at 5 or 8 stave sketches from John Williams, and even though they're not full score, you can see that every intention in the music is there in the sketch, and it just needs writing out in full. And so that's my rule that as long as the intent in the music is very clear, and I know what it's supposed to do, then I can communicate that to my orchestrator or my orchestration team. And great orchestrators will obviously they will have their job is to obviously take that and also give you extras and ideas of what could be done. And I always think that's great, but you don't need to use all of those. So sometimes we have a system where my orchestrators will put extra additions in small fonts so I can see what's been added and what's original. But yeah, I think I always conceive the music to be orchestrated from the beginning. Um, but that you can get really interesting results by just writing on the piano first of all, and then not getting tied into the arrangement until later. I've tried it many different ways. I try and stay fresh, and I try to mix things up so that depending on the type of film, sometimes mostly I'm working on the computer and I write straight into the full score on the computer. But I still have pencil and paper around, and sometimes I will just write something on a piece of paper. And I find that that's really useful because usually if you're trying to find what's wrong about something, as soon as I write it down on the page, you can actually see the shape of it is not correct. It's like you can almost see there's like a spelling error in if you were writing out in words, you can see that the paragraphs are imbalanced. They're not quite the right length or something like that. You can tell when you write music out on a piece of paper where the imbalance is. And or I did a horror film which isn't out yet. It's coming out next year, where I recorded all the music before I saw the film, to script, like you said, and I just recorded hours of multi-track. And then once the film came, I had all the multi-tracks. And then what we did is we took all the multi-tracks and started cutting them to picture and creating a score out of material that was already there, but I didn't quite know what that material was going to do. And that's sort of unusual, and I wouldn't do that very much, but it is, I do like to try and stay fresh and try different ways of working depending on what the film requires.
But do you mix and master your own work as well, or once
Uh,
you're done, you give it to other people to do their work? Or
yeah, I mean, when you're a young composer, you sort of need to learn to do all of these things so that you can get a hang on what that really means. But as you get older, you realize that your job is to write the music, and there are other people who are going to be better at doing mixing and mastering and things like that. So I've been very lucky to work with some of the great engineers, like Peter Cobbin, and working with Sam Okell at the moment, and Jeff Foster at Air, who was very kind to me when I was young, and really. was very supportive. So I've been able to sit next to all of these amazing people and learn, watch them mix and record. And so I'm not bad at it, but I would always prefer that a professional would do it. Partly to have another pair of ears on it as well, because I think it's good. It's the way that I perceive my own music is going to be different to how someone else does. So I like to have someone super experienced listening to the music and picking out what they think are the strong lines and the lead lines. And I can always give them direction and suggest how I saw it. But the thing I've learned from those really great engineers is that simplicity is the way forward. It's quite shocking how simple the solutions will be that they find to things. Whereas when you get involved in trying to mix yourself, you quite often end up doing things in a much more complicated way because you don't. Partly you can't stand back and see the wood from the trees, and when you've written the music and you know all the tiny details, the the temptation as a composer is to try and maintain every last detail. But to a great engineer or a great mixing engineer, they're looking at the bigger picture as like, what's this music trying to say, in the broad sweep? And they'll be much less inclined to try and hang on to every last detail, but much more inclined to make the music speak in the best possible way by taking the strongest elements of it. So that's another good reason I always say to younger composers, if you can afford it, to finding someone
Yeah,
who's good who can help you with that. Yeah.
I got you. Otherwise, you're biased too, right? If you're master, I mean, the
Yeah.
person with mixing should never, ever, ever, ever do the master because they don't see their own problem. They're so
They don't
biased
see
towards
that.
one
Yeah,
way.
we don't see our own problems, and it's a great way having a fresh pair of ears because, as you know,
That's
the
right.
first
Yeah.
the first time you hear something is very it's that's almost the most crucial. Your gut
Mm.
instinct is quite hard to get back once you've heard something 100 times. So yeah,
Gotcha.
mastering is a real dark art, and it's very interesting actually. And great masters are well, they're quite hard to come by actually. I've worked with some really great mastering engineers, and the ones who are really, really good tend to do again very little. They listen to what's there, and like when we mastered Mandela, we all the score had been recorded at Abbey Road in Abbey Road One with Peter Cobbin had recorded and mixed it, him and Kirsty. And then it was mastered at Abbey Road in the mastering suite, and they basically sent back the masters and they said, well, when something's this well recorded and mixed, we don't really do very much. And I was sort of a bit, sort of shocked at the time. And yes, they brought the levels up, and there was a little bit of general EQ, but it really wasn't that different because the material was already, it was good and it was there. It just needed just level management. But there are other times when there have been problems with the recording or there are issues with the bass management in it or something. And really good mastering can help, but it's very much like I was saying with the mixing. It's like, how can you do as little as possible to maintain the integrity of what you're hearing, but make it speak to its best ability? And the more you start interfering with something, the more problems you can create. So good mastering it's a dark art for sure, but it
Yeah,
really makes
absolutely.
when you get good masters, gosh, it makes a difference.
I got you. I got you.
Yeah.
I will ask you some question about some movies. The State of Play, 2009 political thriller. I really like the music, and I have seen the movie as well. And feel free to what memory do you have from that particular one? And it's a great film, great music, and
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's a good film. It was an interesting film because I was working with Flood, who's a wonderful record producer, British record producer, worked with U2 a lot and a million different bands, Sigur Rós, and so Flood was recording and engineering the film for me, which was really fun, and I think goes back to what I was saying about I enjoy working with people from different disciplines. And he was not a film person at all. He came from record side of business, and th I really enjoyed. that because there were things that he would do that was so not what you're supposed to do in film. Like we would record stuff, and when you're recording for film, you're very careful about keeping elements separate because you want mix, you want the ability to mix things or take them out. But we did a whole bunch of sessions at his studio, and he said, well, when we were recording, Bono doing U2, he would just grab a 57 and record the lead vocal in the control room or just standing on his sofa, at home. We would just record it like that, and I was really, my head was a little bit spun because it's like I'm expecting, to be in a film studio where everything is very like sectioned off and very proper. And he was just like, no, it's more important just to get the vibe of something and just to get of course you want separation on things, but he taught me that sometimes recording is it's more important to just be spontaneous and get the vibe of something and then capture something amazing rather than trying to be too controlling over it. So we recorded a lot of material. A lot of it didn't make it into the film, but we did a lot of sessions with different people coming in. We brought a crystal Bachet Cristal from Paris. And we recorded. It had to be dismantled and brought on the ferry across from Paris, and we spent a couple of days recording that. And we did some amazing sessions where we had a drummer and we had a live beatboxer, and the beatboxer and the drummer were doing these sparring sessions. And I'd written some music, and they were like riffing around it. So we had an amazing amount of experimenting, and some of it made it into the film. A lot of it didn't make it into the film, but it sometimes getting to the end result isn't a straight line when you're writing music. And if you've got the luxury of having some time and some budget, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I always wonder why record labels, I don't know whose decision it is, but they don't release the whole score.
Yeah,
Uh, I don't know, just to make something up. A movie X, right? I pick up because I'm tuned to that 10 tracks, and somehow through the process they end up selecting eight, right? And why the other two were not included
right.
in the CD final or deluxe edition, whatever you want to call that drives me crazy.
I think it drives a lot of record collectors crazy, and I
Yeah.
think composers can be blamed quite a lot for it. Um, I think. I know what you mean. I've sort of had a change of heart with this because what I used to do is like to make the record a really good listening experience, and so I would rather combine cues and put them out of sequence from the film,
Mhm.
but have them sequenced on the record so it made a satisfying musical listening experience on a record.
Yeah.
I've sort of in more recent years I've come around to doing it the other way and doing it more sequentially, like material appears in the film. Um, just I don't quite know why I've changed my mind on that, but I know what you mean, and I think one positive thing about all of that is that it has allowed film companies to go back and do deluxe editions of things. Uh, so it's something really interesting. I was listening to that podcast about the reissue of Jaws that's just come out for the 50th anniversary, and that's a brilliant case in point because the original album, it didn't have all the music from the film, and it was all slightly chopped up. And actually, what they used to do in the old days, the Jaws album itself was re-recorded as album versions separate from the film. And so there were all these different versions flying around, and I, I think there's a certain amount of musical archaeology that's gone on, which has been really amazing. Being able to go back and find some of those old scores, it's really exciting to be able to hear some of the outtakes and what have
Mm.
you. But also, I understand as a composer myself that I want the music to be represented the way that I think it best plays on the record. So I'm slightly conflicted between just putting the music on the record exactly as it was,
Mm.
um, but trying to make it the best listening experience. Sometimes in a queue, you have to do slightly funny things like to hit a picture cut, you have to put funny number of beats in a bar to do something. And when we get to the record, it's sometimes it just flows better if you just drop some beats here and there or just make some edits to make it flow as a piece of music. It's just the nature of film music. So that accounts for why it can be different on the record. Sometimes there are copyright issues as well, but and I know on State of Play, I know the album that's out there doesn't represent all the music that's in the film.
Yeah,
Um, and sometimes, it's just the chaos of the film business because I remember we did that film back to back with another two projects either side of it, and my daughter was born right in the middle of all of that. And I don't remember even who cut the soundtrack album together. Sometimes the composer's not even involved, and I don't even remember quite how that was done. And but I know if I see it, I know that there's a whole ton of music that's in the film that's not on the album, but I don't even remember why.
yeah.
Sometimes life just, like I said, intervenes, and it's just what it is.
The budget of when hiring a film composer with yourself, they are going down and down and down and down, and it isn't a surprise that fewer people are buying CDs and buying vinyl, and in general, within that amount, fewer are buying film score and soundtracks, and maybe I'm the exception of the rule, but how you manage? I mean, is it very difficult to make in general terms, right? In general, is it very difficult to make a living as a film composer? You're always fighting and try to arrive the number that makes sense for you, and trying to work in more than one things because you have to pay the bills versus you want to do a TV or a commercial or a film working with a director maybe you don't like, and how difficult is
Well, I mean, we're the happy part of this story that you can make a great living being a film composer, and tough as it can be, it's still we get paid to write music every day, which is
yeah, yes,
that's a wonderful thing. So I always say to kids who are asking me for advice, I get to my job is to get up every day and write music, and someone pays me. Sometimes the budget is great, sometimes the budget isn't great, but still it all evens out. But I'm still being, paid to do what I love. So that's the big win. I'm lucky I've got quite a big catalogue of films. I probably have done 70 plus films at this point. So I'm lucky that I do have a certain amount of income that comes from royalties and
got it.
have you. But it's changing all the time. The financial model changes almost on a daily basis, and no one really understands what streaming means financially. Having a million streams on Spotify, but that sounds like a lot, but it's barely financially that barely sort of means anything. You need to get into hundreds of millions and billions before
Right.
before it's like really
Yeah.
large amounts of money. But that said, there are many different ways to earn money doing music. People can write production music, which can be great. And when I was really young, I did a little bit of that and doing arrangements. And also, the other thing I say to younger composers is that, yeah, we all want to be writing orchestral music because the orchestra is like the language of film and that's what we love. But sometimes having the financial constraints of a smaller budget can be really inspiring. And some of the more interesting music that great composers have written have been for smaller ensembles where they've just had a smaller budget or less time and just have had to make that work. I always think of Chinatown, Jerry Goldsmith's score, as being a really, great example of that. Was written super quickly, and it wasn't a big orchestral session. Had this funny combination of like I don't know how many harps and pianos, and then the trumpet and the small string section, and it's just brilliant for it. It's really creative. So sometimes just saying, well, I've only got I can have four people on this movie. What can I do with what can I do with four people that would be interesting, can force you to make creative decisions that, it's up to you to come up with something creatively interesting. So, yeah,
Good. The Last King of Scotland in 2006. Uh, that's a great movie, man, and a great music as well. What memory do you have for that one?
cool. Yeah. Gosh, it's well, I
20
touched.
years, huh, or
Yeah, I
so.
know. It seems a long time ago. Oh my God. Well, as
Yeah.
I said before, one of the great experiences was going out to Uganda and spending time there whilst it was just before they started filming, so the actors were just arriving. Forrest was there, James McAvoy was there, and so I got to spend time with James. Forrest was very he was very in his mindset of getting into character, so we sort of left him alone a little bit. But being there and getting to record a lot of stuff out there, we were, as well as recording those songs that I mentioned that we produced to recreate the sound of the 70s in East Africa. We also recorded a choir. We recorded this amazing band that we put on the end of the movie. Actually, it was an incredible dance troupe and a really young girl. She was, I think, 13 or 14. We went to see the show one night. I went with Kevin and James McAvoy and a couple of people, Kerry Washington, and we saw this dance show, and this young girl came on and sang this song in Luganda in the local language, and it was so great. Kevin and I just remember we looked at each other and they're like, we've got to record this because this is amazing, and we arranged with them. The film company paid them to come back and make a recording, and we brought a mobile rig and we recorded it in a field. I remember a week later or something, and that's what ended up on the end montage of the film because it's just so strong. And Kevin being a documentary maker, even though this is a feature, I think he really likes finding, something authentic and genuine about a place that sort of inspires him. And so it was a really unique and experience, and I made friends, and I returned to Uganda a few years afterwards. I made a record called Face to Face, which was where I met Ryuichi Sakamoto, actually. But before I recorded with Ryuichi, I went back to Uganda and recorded some tracks for the record with my friend Koesa, who appears on the film, and he's on the record as well. And we went back to, because I love Kampala. It's such an incredible place, beautiful place. So I got to go back out there and do some recording, and yeah, once again, I never went looking for these experiences of collaborating with different people, but I've enjoyed them, and the more that I've enjoyed them, those experiences seem to have sort of somehow magnetically followed me, and that's how making that record. Then I went out to New York and recorded some songs with Regina Spektor. Um, and then we went back to New York, and I wanted to do something with Richie Sakamoto because I was, I was a big fan of his music, but I didn't know him, and I got to make an introduction, and I explained to him what I wanted to do with two pianos. I wanted us to record two piano music together, and so he had a studio that he really liked in New York, which is now no longer there, but there was a piano that he really liked, the Steinway, in there. So we brought in an extra Steinway and we set up both pianos sort of facing each other like this. And we just hit record. In fact, I remember him laughing because I turned up in New York from London and he said, "So what's the plan?" He thought I was going to bring a stack of music with me. And I said, no, no, Ryuichi, the plan is that we're going to write and we're going to play this music right, right now. And he was like, oh, he was laughing. It's like, okay, well, you've come all this way. That sounds a bit crazy, but let's
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
Uh, but that was sort of the concept of that record, was to just to be inspired in the moment and to be inspired by each other, but also the surroundings. Being in, I wanted to record in places that I was not familiar with,
Mm.
and I remember there was a really big thunderstorm. It was one of those New York days where it was really hot and muggy in the summer, and there was a big thunderstorm. And one of the pieces ended up being called Manhattan Rain because you could hear when we were recording, you could hear the rain like pounding down on on the roof of the studio. It was so heavy. And so I chose two pieces from each artist that I collaborated with on that record to make the record, which was sort of like a portmanteau of different people and places. And then years later, sadly, when Ryuichi died, which was what, a year and 2 years ago, coming up now, I think.
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, a friend of mine said, had remembered that we'd recorded a lot more music that went on the record. It was a little bit like what you were saying now, why doesn't all the music get put on a soundtrack? And this was just a case in point of, well, we recorded a lot more, but I chose what I wanted to use and the rest got archived and I just hadn't listened to it for many years. And so when I heard the terrible news that Ricci, I knew he was sick, but it was a shock when he died. And so a little bit afterwards, a friend of mine said, go back through the archive and have a listen to those sessions. And I was really amazed with how much music was there that I'd forgotten about. And so I started just to see whether anything was viable. I started cutting some stuff together and doing a little mix just to see. And I played it to a couple of people, and they thought that people would be interested to hear it, and that's how we ended up releasing these two EPs of material, Crystalline, and now the Unfinished, which we just released a couple of weeks ago, and that really came from those same sessions, but they rather than make them into like finished pieces, I wanted you to be able to hear very much like I remember it on the day, being very unfiltered and pure, like it's just us just playing and improvising and writing as we were going. So it's sort of like a snapshot, a musical snapshot of a moment in time.
Uh, I would love to listen to the rest. Finish because well, I tried to interview Luigi Sakamoto, and at the time he was living in New York, he was very sick, and
Yeah.
his manager say, no, there's no way we can do it. If you have contacted me 2 years before, maybe I could have done it. And of course, because I like the work he done with David Sylvian, right? So
Mhm.
I have and I have seen movies where he composed the music and all the work he had done. The guy was out of this world. So
Yeah.
yeah. So my question is, that you mentioned now is to work with the guy and meet the guy and spend time, on a rainy day in New York, and
Yeah.
to staying with piano facing one to another. Man, what an opportunity, what an honor, man, for you. Good for you, man.
Yeah.
Very happy for you. Yeah.
No, it was wonderful, and the funny thing was that we we talked and we were communicating on email a little bit as well. But I knew him as quite a quiet person and not a very verbal
Yeah.
person. So we communicated more in music than talking. But he was a very inspiring person, and it was just so nice to rediscover that music for myself because I genuinely had forgotten how much music was, that we'd recorded that was sitting in that
Yeah.
archive.
Yeah.
So it was when I started listening to it, it was like, oh wow, gosh, there's all this stuff that I just had forgotten about. So it's really nice that people have got to hear it and felt I think a lot of people felt very, shocked when he died, and people feel really strongly about his music and what he achieved. And so I had quite a lot of people writing to me and just thanking me for releasing that stuff because they felt it was very cathartic to hear, really, which is great because all I'm really asking for as a composer is to have one person be moved or feel like their day's been a bit better or a bit more fun or a bit more interesting by hearing something you've done. I mean, it sort of sounds corny, but it's the truth. That's really that's the big payoff that makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, I got it. I got it. What memory do you have from Mandela? Of course, the film for 2013, but
Yeah.
12 years ago, man. That's another great film and another great music as well, man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was an incredible experience in going to Johannesburg and recording there with singers and percussionists. Um, it was great. I think I was very aware of not being South African, being British and white and coming into this scenario. It's sort of tricky, and I was very open about not wanting to try and rewrite their emotional history. That's why I wanted to be involved in South Africa. I wanted to work with these musicians. I knew what I wanted to create, but I wanted them to be involved in it as well. And I think when people saw I was very open to that, and they were very, very generous with me and very wanting to be involved and wanting to be a part of it and wanting to help. So yeah, I remember it was difficult for those reasons, but part of it was just me trying to be sensitive to the situation and not just appropriate someone else's musical culture. This is the tricky thing about films because we're always taking ideas from here, there, and sort of like synthesizing and putting them together in new ways. And what I've always tried to do with these films that are set in different countries is just be respectful to where that music's coming from. Because I hear a lot of film scores where stuff's just jammed together and it's not very artful, it's not very respectful. So I've always just tried to just go into it with that mindset of showing some respect. Um, that's just my thing.
Yep. You tell me when my time is up because I've
Yeah,
been
if I think we'll be good 5 minutes, and I'm gonna
okay.
have to run, but I'm
Yep,
enjoying
no, no
talking.
problem. You are another movie that I like is The Rite of
Oh, right, yeah.
Orchestration. It's a great movie. It did okay in the movie theaters. I like the idea because I like the topic, but it's with Anthony Hopkins, of course, the great film, and great music as well. So,
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, he's genuine. Yeah, I mean, he's a one-off, Anthony Hopkins.
oh
He's
yeah,
like of his
absolutely,
generation.
yeah,
There's almost no one like
that's
him.
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
I actually had a great opportunity because he writes really beautiful music. He's a great painter as well, actually, and
yep.
he's very passionate about music. And we did a concert together in the UK at where was it? It was in Symphony Hall with the Birmingham Symphony quite a few years ago now. It was after we did that film, and he was having some music of his performed in the concert, and I wrote a concert suite based on the music from the Rite, and that we performed that in the same concert. So I got to spend a day sitting with him and talking music a bit, and just seeing the delight on his face, listening to the music that he'd written, being played by the orchestra. I mean, he was just in like seventh heaven. He just loves music. So that was a very unique experience.
Yep. Hope Gap is another great movie, 2019. I think it didn't do well in the theater. I look at the
Good film, yeah.
IMDb.com and whatever they have
Yeah.
this. The music is very, very good.
Oh,
It's
thank you. This is
unfortunately
one of the
people,
it's one of the interesting things about film music that, I mean, Hope Gaps, it's a good film, and there's Bill Nicholson who wrote it. He's a wonderful writer, and Annette is amazing. But sometimes a film doesn't get a huge reach, but the interesting thing is that film music can also have its own life separate from the film. And the funny thing is that people were asking me, originally we didn't release an album for that. Just it was a smaller film, and then people were asking could they hear the music, and so we released a shorter album, and and it's gone on to sort of have a life of its own, and people really like the music and want to play it on the piano, and a lot of people contact me about getting the sheet music. And that's one of the amazing things about film music, is that sometimes the music has its own life as well, which is something you can't it just happens on its own sometimes, and it's a wonderful thing.
what are you working nowadays? If you could talk or mention or
Um, yeah, so there's a few things coming up. There's that horror film Dragon that I talked about, which will be out next year.
Yep,
There's quite an exciting project with a band called the Beatles that we can talk about closer to towards the end of the year.
Oh,
That's quite exciting.
yeah.
Um, um, that I've been involved with. I've just finished a film called Sierra Madre, which it's set in South America. Like
All right.
so, there's we recorded lots of Latin percussion for that, which is great. That was enjoyable. And I'm currently working on a movie with James McAvoy again from Last King of Scotland, just to bring this conversation full circle. So,
Wow, good for you, man. Yeah,
so there's
good.
lots of lots of stuff going on.
Good.
So yeah,
Good for you. Thanks, Alex, for your time, your wisdom. I learned a lot about music. I hope you liked the question, and I'm looking
yeah,
forward to meeting you one day and having dinner with you and visiting
yeah,
somewhere. And if
yeah,
you're in Los Angeles or London, whatever, you go
for
back and
sure.
forth between Los Angeles and
Yeah, I still have
London.
a house in London and record
Yeah,
there quite a bit. So yeah, I'm lucky to
yeah.
have both places. Yeah, in my life. Yeah, yeah.
Good
This
for
has been
you,
great.
man.
I've enjoyed this conversation a lot. Thank
Same
you.
here, man. Thank you very much, man.
All right. Speak
Take
soon.
it easy.
Okay.
Thanks.